Hey everyone, Badger Jeff coming to you again, showing another show and tell episode. Instead of showing you a bunch of stack of cards and kind of without any context, I thought I would change it up a bit and start showing cards I picked up when they complete a PSA registry set. So as some of you may know, I am collecting the 1948 to current Green Bay Packers team set in the registry, PSA registry, which is well over 1,000 cards. And I just picked up the last 1962 card, so I thought I would show the complete team set. So I will be referring to 1961 stats because, as any of you know who were collecting cards in the 80s or 90s or earlier, the stats refer to the year before on these cards. There wasn't, the newest rookie didn't have a card at the time, which typically, like you do nowadays. So 1961 Green Bay Packers is the first set I'll do, and I'll kind of work my way through the decades. I have quite a few of the years already complete, so I'll make those videos over time if anyone's interested. So 1961, the Packers were 11-3. They were first in the NFL West. Coach Lombardi was there. He was in, his third or fourth season? I think he came in 57 and started changing the way that the Packers, their tradition from they had a tough time in the 50s and late 40s and came back to their winning ways. So in 1961, the Packers did win the NFL championship. They won 37-0 over the New York Giants, and added to the long line of titles that they collected back in the 60s, even before the Super Bowl. So if any kids are watching, yes, there were championships before the Super Bowl, even though the Packers won the first two. So here's the team card, and I'll just walk through the players that are in the set. Obviously, the whole team isn't in the set, just like now. Most of the players aren't in it. So I think most everyone's seen this guy before. This is Bart Starr, the quarterback. He had a decent year, made the Pro Bowl, started all 14 games for the season, had about 2,400 passing yards, 16 touchdowns, but also 16 interceptions. Amazingly enough, that was good enough to make the Pro Bowl back in 1961. But more importantly, as most Bart Starr fans know, he was a winner and he won the NFL championship. That's all that matters. It wasn't about stats back then, and most teams ran the ball anyways. This is the card that I just picked up, and it's the one I needed to complete the set. Pretty beautiful Paul Hornung in a 7. Bart Starr was in a 7 as well as the team card. 7 is about as good as I want to go for some of these cards, or else you get very expensive. And with these black borders, it's tough. So I should have pointed out before, the 62 card, you have the portrait and the big picture in color, and then an in-action photo in black and white, which is very cool to look back at those in-action pictures to see what the NFL was like back then. Paul Hornung was a halfback, and he also was the kicker. He started 11 out of 12 games that year, only ran for 597 rushing yards and 145 receiving yards, but he did pick up 10 touchdowns. And some of you may know that Paul Hornung owned the NFL scoring record until Jerry Rice beat it, I think, broke it. So 10 touchdowns is quite a bit for that amount of yards. He also was the field goal kicker, so that helped him get points to his season total. He was only 15-22 for field goals, but was 41 of 41 for extra points, and was a first-team All-Pro with those stats. And if you want to see the back of these cards, they are a vertical, and usually they didn't provide too much information, at least anecdotal information about the players, like in other cards, but they did provide some stats that were pertinent to the player at the time, whether it's scoring or tackles, and just your basic stats. Next card is another running back, Tom Moore, who played for the Packers for a couple years and was a decent halfback. He only started 2 games, but I'm sure he played in quite a few of them. He played in 13. He had 300 yards rushing, 41 yards receiving. But interestingly, he had a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown, and a passing touchdown. A lot of the running backs had passing touchdowns back then, so if anyone knows why, if they had trick plays or whatnot, let me know. I know they ran a lot of like wishbone type formations where they had more than one running back out there at a time. But you can see in this picture here, he's even in this in-action picture, I'm trying to catch a pass there. It looks like maybe against the Giants or somebody. That's in a 6. The next card is Jim Taylor, all-time Packer great from Louisiana. It's a beautiful card. He was the fullback, but was the leading rusher by far. Just like Jim Brown was a fullback. They got the ball a lot back then. He started all 14 games for the Packers. 1,307 rushing yards, which is quite a few. 15 touchdowns rushing. I also had 25 receptions for another touchdown and made the Pro Bowl. So it's interesting to look back at those stats from the 50s and 60s and see how many of the running backs actually caught the ball back then, which I didn't realize. I thought that was more of a West Coast thing with Walsh. But no, they were throwing the running backs back then too. The next card, we're halfway through the set already. Max McGee, the number 1 leading receiver for the Packers, famously was injured in the first Super Bowl. That's why Boyd Dowler came in and kind of helped him win. But he led the team in receptions with 51, had 883 yards, 7 receiving touchdowns. He led the team in receiving most of the time back then. And he was also a punter. He punted 13 times and averaged about 40 yards a punt. But then it looks like Boyd Dowler, the other wide receiver, starting receiver, took over for punting sometime in the season, and he was a Pro Bowler. So it's a cool action shot, number 85. Next card is Jim Ringo, one of the all-time NFL greats, center for the Packers, just a long time all-pro center. And in 1961 was no different, made the all-pro team in the Pro Bowl. They didn't keep track of pancakes, blocks, or anything like that, but you can imagine that guy coming at you on the Packer sweep, and he got out of the way. One of the rookies, there's 2 rookies in this set for the Packers. Fuzzy Thurston, Fred, you can see he's got the flat top haircut there. He was a guard for the Packers, quite a personality. If you ever see any old videos of him, he was kind of a Wisconsin legend after he retired. Quite a character. But he was also in 1961. I think this was his only All-Pro year. So he was an All-Pro in 61, and that's why he got a card. I think he started playing before that. This is considered his rookie card. Another card is Forrest Gregg. You see quite a few lineman cards because they had such a great line back then. What can you say about Forrest Gregg? He's a all-time great tackle for the Packers. In 61 made the Pro Bowl, though he wasn't all pro. It was the first time he would go all pro the next 6 years. So he was all pro in 60, missed 61, and then was almost to the 70s. Lombardi said he's the finest player that he's ever coached, and he basically was just one of the all-time great tackles. Another beautiful card in a 7. And a 7 is just fine for me. A lot of times you have centering issues with these. And obviously those black border cards are tough. In a 6, we got Boyd Dowler. Another great action shot in the top left. He was the other starting wide receiver. Started all 14 games. Had 36 receptions for 633 yards. So it's about 2/3 of what Max McGee had. He only had 3 touchdowns, but he was also the primary punter. So he had 38 punts that year and averaged 44 yards a punt. Seems pretty good. And Super Bowl I hero. Last 3 cards. Hank Jordan, great defensive end. Who knows how many sacks this guy had because they didn't count him back then. But just a wrecking ball. He started 9 out of 14 games. Was a first-team All-Pro like he was most of his career, and went on to oversee Summerfest. If anybody's ever been to Milwaukee to the music festival, I think he was either the first director or one of the first. Sadly, he had a heart attack in his 50s after he was done running, but big guy. He and then Robinson kind of took over for him later in the 60s at the end. Bill Forrester, all-time great linebacker for the Packers. Not much to say about him for stats-wise, but he started 9 games, played in all 14, and is a first-team All-Pro for the NFL. So when you win the NFL championship, you get a lot of All-Pro players. And then the last card, which is an interesting one, was also on a 6, so I guess 6 and 7s are what I got in this set. Earl Gross. This is his rookie card, and he didn't play in 61. This is actually, he was a rookie in 62 when he was drafted in the first round by the Packers, 14th overall pick. And the Oilers also picked him in the AFL draft, but he decided to come to Green Bay and was the backup for fellow LSU player Jimmy Taylor. So didn't have a great career with the Packers. Just played a couple years, and I think he had like 5 or 6 touchdowns over 2 years. But famously, he was traded with Jim Ringo in 1964 to the Eagles, which was, I think, a big deal at the time because Ringo was such a mainstay in the Packers line. I think he had a beef with Lombardi. So those two were traded for Leroy Caffey, who ended up being he was a first-round draft pick. Good player for the Packers in the later 60s. So that's the 1961 team set. Hope you enjoy it and look for future years to come. All right, bye-bye.